I want to talk about stigmas, specifically stigmas as an obstacle to full recovery. We have talked about stigmas before, touched on them in regards to eating disorders, in regards to mental health in general, and obviously we know that there are many stigmas surrounding eating disorders and mental health in general, and these stigmas can prevent us from feeling accepted and from feeling like we belong in society at certain points. Sometimes stigmas make us feel misunderstood. Sometimes stigmas actually prevent us from getting the best care possible. But today, what I want to focus on is stigmas preventing full recovery, because it is an issue. I'm going to be throwing out a lot of different examples when I'm talking about stigmas in this video. And the first example that I'm thinking of when I'm thinking of a stigma is eating disorder not otherwise specified. It's usually called EDNOS, and even though it was primarily used before the newest DSM came out, it became a very big catch-all diagnosis for many people with severe, serious eating disorders who didn't fall into the anorexia or bulimia category and didn't even fall into a binge eating disorder category either. And binge eating disorder, had an even lesser classification, but was not a catch-all in the way that EDNOS was. And why I'm thinking of EDNOS when I'm thinking about stigma is that there's just this overwhelming thought that people who struggle with an eating disorder that isn't anorexia or bulimia is somehow not suffering as much and will be able to recover much more easily and doesn't have serious health problems. And that's very problematic, because when a stigma like that exists, it makes people who are diagnosed with EDNOS feel that they don't really have a real problem, or they don't warrant help, or they don't warrant the kind of help that someone with anorexia, for example, deserves. And that's sad, because when that stigma is out there, these people are essentially taking on the idea, I'm not worth it. EDNOS isn't a big deal. And where that becomes problematic is people with EDNOS, not as a blanket statement, everyone with EDNOS will do this, but people with EDNOS can sometimes actually choose not to improve and not to try as hard in recovery in order to maintain some of the symptoms they have that will allow them to get certain kinds of treatment or care. And again, that's just a travesty. It should not happen. It's unacceptable, but it does happen all the time. And in fact, on an even bigger scale, there are those with EDNOS who will actually not only not improve, but make themselves worse, essentially. And that would be in order to hopefully get that diagnosis of anorexia or that diagnosis of bulimia. And that is not something that anyone should be striving for. The specific diagnosis does not matter as much as the fact that there is a serious problem. And if you are diagnosed with any eating disorder, regardless of whether or not that eating disorder is EDNOS, eating disorder not otherwise specified, you deserve help, you should have help, and it is serious. There is a problem. Diagnosis is not the most important thing in the equation. Now I want to talk about stigma as it relates to breaking away from your illness, breaking away from your eating disorder. I think, unfortunately, many people find that as they do better and better in recovery and are more functioning in life and are happier and healthier, they have the desire or the need, or both, to go on with things, to get jobs, to raise a family, to do any number of things that they may have put off because their health was the top priority. And now that they are healthy, and they are ready to take on life, they feel that they've been branded with a mental illness. Because when you're doing well, but you haven't yet necessarily reached full recovery, you will still have that diagnosis of an eating disorder or a mental health issue. And if it ever needs to be disclosed in a doctor's office, in therapy, if for insurance purposes, it has the potential to hurt people. And again, it's just unacceptable and sad. And what people have done is they have been so brave as to face their mental health issue and brave enough to recover and put in all the work and effort and do great things. And when they're finally trying to move on with their life, they still have that silly diagnosis. They still have that documentation associated with them. And all they've been trying to do this whole time was break away from their eating disorder. And they can't break all the way away a lot of the time because of that branding. Now, there are plenty of times when that branding doesn't stay with you, and there are plenty of times when even when you have an eating disorder diagnosis, of course, you don't have to disclose it, and there are many people in your life, in your work life, who will not ever know unless you choose to share it with them. But even when it goes unsaid and unheard, it can still feel like something that is part of you when it shouldn't be that way. And that's the kind of thing, that's the kind of stigma, that mental illness stigma, that can hold you back from achieving full recovery, because you always feel like you can't shake it off and get rid of it. But you can. You can. You're more than a diagnosis. You are not your condition. You are you. That's hard with family stuff too, because you don't want to be the mom with an eating disorder. And even after you have achieved recovery and you're doing well and you're healthy and you're taking care of yourself, it can be very difficult to decide when or whether to disclose to your children, for example, that you used to struggle with an eating disorder. And even if it's not relevant or important that your child knows that you struggled with an eating disorder, it can still weigh upon you, and it can still be in the back of your mind. And that's hard, that's difficult. And I think it's because having a mental illness, having a diagnosis like an eating disorder, it's heavy, and it comes with a stigma. And that stigma can be so powerful, but only if we let it. I also think we run into the stigma a lot with mental health, where it's two extremes. Either there is a stigma associated with mental illness that is mental illness is not as serious as physical illness. It's not a big deal. It's not real. And then there's the stigma on the complete other extreme, where people with a mental illness are crazy. They're scary. Don't mess with someone with a mental illness. Who would want to be in a relationship with someone who had a diagnosed mental illness? Who would want to have their children watched by someone with a diagnosed mental illness? Who would want to hire someone with a mental illness? All these stigmas are so harmful. And it's just so interesting to me how you can have that stigma of, oh, mental health, that not a big deal. Depression is, no big thing. Just suck it up and deal with it. It's not real. And then that whole other side where mental illness is this bigger than everything and everyone sort of concept where no one wants to deal with it because it is so severe. So you're kind of between a rock and a hard place. It makes it very hard to break away from that. There are stigmas about the use of medication. Medication certainly isn't for everyone, but there are people who take medication regularly. It helps them with their recovery. It doesn't do recovery for them, but there may be issues with depression, anxiety, impulses, so many different things, but there may be things that they take medication for that helps them live a full and authentic life, keeps them healthy, lets them be who they really are. And it can be very hard to take medication when society or your friends or your family members are telling you you shouldn't be doing that, that you should be able to deal with it on your own, and that medication is a cop-out. And, language like that does exist. People do say things like that, and it's very hurtful. And oftentimes, people who take medication do so only as a last resort. They may have tried all other kinds of treatments. They may be doing lots of other things in conjunction with taking medication. They may be in therapy. They may be, doing lots of other things for their general health and wellness, and medication is just another additive. I do agree that medication can be prescribed maybe too quickly in harmful doses at times. I'm not a psychiatrist, but I do know that sometimes people do use medication as a cop-out. But as I said at the beginning of this, medication is not for everyone. No one person is the same as another person. There are so many different medications, so many different dosages, and it may not be right for you. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that if that's what you choose and if you are able to do well without it. But there are some people who do choose that and who do very well with that. And I think there's a huge stigma attached to the use of medication for mental health issues. So this is just the tip of the iceberg with these stigmas associated with eating disorders. I could go on forever, but I don't want this video to be an hour long. What I'm trying to say when I'm giving examples of all these different stigmas in relation to eating disorders and mental health issues is these stigmas may exist out there. And even though people like you and I are trying to fight them and break them down and show everyone in society that these stigmas do not have to exist, they will still most likely exist for a time, and you will have to deal with them. You will have to face them. You'll be up against them on a daily basis if you have an eating disorder. But you don't have to let these stigmas define you, and you don't have to let these stigmas hold you back. And certainly, you don't want to let them stop you from achieving full recovery, because what happens a lot of the time is the stigma wins. If you don't achieve full recovery because of these stigmas sort of keeping you down and tying you down and keeping you from being who you are and expressing yourself in the ways that you need to, then you are helping to perpetuate the stigmas. The stigmas win. So you want your recovery to win. You want you to win. You want yourself to be able to be free of all that stuff. And being free of your eating disorder means being free of myths and stereotypes and stigmas. And I want that for everyone. Everyone deserves that. And I do hope in time that these stigmas will dissipate and will be erased. Thanks for watching, everyone. See you next time.